Alright, hello and welcome to the Sage of Tarn version 0.495 March 2023 Alpha. So just to go over what we're going to go through today, if you look at the changelog on the side, we have the additions, the adjustments, and a couple of the bugs. I'm going to go into detail with all of these, and we have a fair amount of detail to go through today, so strap in, essentially. Let's begin with following up on last time where we had the base menu system working, and I felt the need to make some cleanup, which is what I've been doing since August till around November, where I may or may not have forgotten to make a little update. That is why we have a little larger time span in between. So to begin with, new folder structure refers to the fact that I've been sorting and going through all of the code and documenting the things that need documenting so that I know which code does what, kind of, as well as sorting out all of the code that I have not been using, which is a fair amount. It's basically it's comprised of like previous versions of the newer scripts that I'm using. So like if I've developed something and then done version 2, 3, or 4, and I'm then using version 4, then all of the previous versions I still have, but I'm not using them, so they have gotten their old folder, and that's basically the gist of it. For the next one, we have the unit base stats. As you can see up in the top, we have some UI elements for it. We'll go into that. Basically, we have health, stamina, and magic, each with their own bar. It is inspired from the test UI, as we mentioned, as I showcased earlier. These now function, although admittedly not quite yet. The health bar I'm just right now gotten to experiment with, but we have the variables for each. Additionally, it's basically max health, current health, max stamina, current stamina, max magic, current magic. That's the variable set for them. We have the UI sprites for each of the bars. They're technically the same one that we're just cutting down because I made a couple of shaders that handle the color schemes for each, as well as the size, as well as where the current is displayed. So, for example, what that means is essentially that up here you have 100% of the health bar is here, and currently there's 100% in it. Whereas down here it is 100% of this bar is at this level, and it's only half filled. So, you know, it scales nicely. I'll show what I mean in a little bit. I have added a new layer for these UI elements as well. This is not something you need to worry about. This is just something for me. And with that mentioned, let me show the thing. If I just get hit by a guy, as you can see, we've now lost a little bit of health. He essentially damaged me, although do keep in mind that I can't die just yet because we don't have a death state, but technically we can make the HP bar go to 0. We can play a little bit around it when we look into collisions later on. So we'll use it down a little bit for me. So, what have I been working on for the after November? Well, basically, I was stuck in a little bit after fixing the code pieces. It was sort of like, okay, I need to make the UI, aka this stuff up here. In order to do that, I need the stats behind it. Okay, we've started to add in those. We don't have all of them. In order to know what interacts with the stats or gives the stats, we kind of need an inventory system, which we have the preliminary amount of, but obviously, if you remember, the inventory option didn't work before. And then, of course, the items that go into the inventory that can then affect everything else also needs to be sort of designed all at the same time. This, of course, gets quite confusing, as I'm sure you can tell already. So I've been doing the base upgrade of the inventory system in order to have additional features that I need, and I'll get to those, as well as the inventory menu. So let's start with the inventory. First things first. As I'm moving about in the menu over here, you will notice this. This is essentially the newer display, but it isn't set for this menu in particular. It will make sense when I click here. So, for the inventory, these are the 9 item slots that we will have. And I should have used something other than the name of item when we go down and below, which basically comprise of core, spell 1 and 2, item 1 and 2, left hand 1 and 2, right hand 1 and 2, left ring, right ring. These are still preliminary, but these are essentially the things that the player will be able to interact with and equip to their character. This gives us a 9 selection of 11 things that you can put onto your character. The configuration scheme for the menu, obviously, if you remember, for these menus is just sort of up and down, very simplistically like this, if you follow where the yellow option goes. Now, since I kind of wanted to have the menu displayed in another way than just a list, I've also added the additional option to like control where each of these are gonna be. And the basic configuration that I put it in is this. Now, while working on that, because I've been playing another game where swapping your items in and out is a thing you can do, I kind of designed this with the intent of it being able to be swapped. So let me try and describe what I mean here. If I, from playing around in the game, I click once, I click twice, I click a third time, and then move one, and then click again, and out twice. This means that the sequence to go into the menu and swap an item out is very quick, or at least it feels very good. An additional factor regarding that is that we always start at the core, which means in this particular configuration over here, you start at the center, it's 2 clicks to get to spell 2, 2 to get to this one, 2 to get to each of these, and only 1 to get to the last 4. It's essentially the shortest path to all of them, if that makes sense, in order to make it feel nicer for the player. And of course, we then have each of these options, but the display of these can change a little bit. But you then get additional 5 options for each. This, at the same time of not only being the 11 stacked inventory options of what you have currently equipped, it also gives us the maximum amount of items you can carry, which will in this case be 55, which I kind of like. And of course, we're going to add a, bottomless pit or something like that, where you can keep everything else you don't have ready to use, so to speak. That will come at a later stage, and maybe I'll fiddle around with it. In any case, given the name of all of these items... Oh, hold on, let me just read up a little bit on all my things. Yeah, so basically this can be controlled using the D-pads. Each of the individual points here can be chosen to have a specific connection, so it's not just... If I am on item 2, I, in this case, can choose to go upwards, and we go to item number 1. And then up again for core, and then up again, and so on. But there's nothing that stops me from going from item 1 all the way to spell 2 if I want to reconfigure it in another scenario. You could essentially... I can move all of these around as I so choose, as long as I make sure the connections are set. That's also why if you look over here now, if I go from item 2 and I just keep clicking upwards, it's going to look a little weird. It's going to skip up and down. So don't worry too much about this over here when we're in the inventory menu. But when we're in the other menus, this is still the main view. I know, a little confusing, but that's just because I wanted to see the visual difference between the two. This, of course, is the primary work of upgrading the inventory menu to essentially have both the navigation, but also like the logical design of it. It required an upgrade to do it, but it's kind of nice now. Let me see here. Oh yeah, one more thing. You might notice that the return option for each of the menus is gone. If we go into these, there's missing an option. That's because I have removed it and just added it to circle instead, because it's kind of faster if you can just spam click circle to get out of all of them. If we go in a little bit into debug features, into this menu, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're out. Rather than having to make sure to click down and, it's one more thing I can remove from the list of options as well, so that's a little more efficiency too. I do need somewhere that obviously tells you that you can go back out, so like in the corner down here is return, click 0 or whatever equivalent key, but that will come later, and this is just because it kind of feels better. Speaking of what feels better, if we look over here again, I did actually have this in another configuration that looks cooler, where these items in here are they are made in a circle instead, and then these two are at the top and the bottom. I'm not sure if you can visualize it, but it's basically take these two here, drag them down a bit, take this one, and push them out a bit further, and then these two and push them up. Problem with it was, when you then go to the left and you go up, it goes diagonal. Which, weirdly enough, doesn't feel bad going from this one to spell 2, because when you go down again, it goes back to this. But if it's set in the previous configuration, it felt absolutely terrible, despite looking great. So I immediately removed it, because I kind of, you know, it was just... It was cool to look at, but it was terrible to move around in, so I simplified it down to this. I may play around with that more, but I can make this work. This is a decent overview for it. I'm not sure if it's the best, but you know, we have the option now to essentially reshuffle everything into a new configuration if I want to. Speaking of, I do have, yeah, so I made one additional script for like you adding additional menus. Not really something you have to worry about, it's just for my own sake, to make it easier to stack in anyone. Anyway, speaking of that, let's go into the... I didn't mention that in the changelog overview, you can see, but basically what I have is also the design only for each of the inventory things, because part of the issue of making all of this is sort of to figure out what should the player later on be able to use within the game as we move about and, you know, jump and all, throw things and whatnot. So obviously now we have a list of things. We have a core. We have spells, we have items, we have weapons. In this case, for the left hand and the right hand, obviously, we have weapons, shields, and spell tools, and so on. So let me go through my thought process for all of these. Let's start by the cores. This is just going to be me talking a little bit, so just go with it. Essentially what I'm thinking here is that I want to be able to make the player customize their character in a nice way so that they look the way they want. With one exception, and that's that you equip the core that you have. Right, so the center, let's oh, I'm not sure if I can do that. He might be, you know, actually hold on, I can do this. Wait, okay, I need to dual wield. So the core is obviously the centerpiece of him, right? I feel like that needs to be displayable, and then you can make your fashion, so to speak, around it. And what the core needs to contain is, first of all, the weight class of the entire character. So this could either be how fast you move, or how slow you move, or how much poise potentially you have, plus a unique effect. Since I was thinking that we could essentially work with passives that could affect some of the base components of how the gameplay works. To be, you know, to be continued, essentially. It's an idea. It's design only, but it's for the upscale of it. Make it a unique effect that cannot be changed, per se, and the reason for that makes sense when we get to some of the later options. Anyway, let's go in here again, just so you can see it. Kind of I need to do all of it. Okay, actually, I don't need to do it now. Anyway, so additionally for the core, aside from the weight class and the unique effect, it also functions as stat housing. See, I was thinking about how to level up the character if we're going for the RPG style, and I've thought of one interesting thing, which is a little complicated because it conjoins a few different things. First of all, stats. Second of all, the fact that you can switch core. And third of all, how you interact with multiplayer when we are talking like, essentially, if we look at an invasion style thing, what will be the connections between the two. So, I don't know all the stats for each core yet, but here's what I do know. They need to hold the health, the stamina, the magic, the poise, the defense. Potentially defense for different damage types. If we look at health, there is no regen because we go with a flask-based heal. Stamina will be a fast base regen, magic will be a slow base regen, and poise will be a fast base regen. All of these are subject to change, of course, to whatever fits, but the interesting thing about being able to swap out the core at different levels means that essentially, imagine that you put on the first core that you find. You start leveling it up. There is a max level, we'll get to it. and then you level it all the way to the max, but you kind of want to go back down to another one, which is lower. That means you can essentially, in the center, have your primary max level character, and then I can go over to the right, I can click Equip Core, and suddenly I equip a core that is much lower, which of course reduces all my stats to whatever that core has, but also reduces the overall level of the character back down again. This gives a lot of flexibility for the player to choose what invasion range, per se, they would want to be in. So, just as an arbitrary choice, if we look at the overall core level, there will be a max of 123, and the people that know why will know why. There will be a starting level per core. Each core can potentially come from different creatures or just be a starting class set of cores that you choose, pick your Pokemon kind of, or in this case yourself. The thought process here is that you have 100 hard points and 23 soft points. And this is my system design, which I'm not entirely sure precisely how to explain per se, but think of it like this. You start at level 0, and then you have 23 soft points you can put into whatever. The core will also have sort of a base level of stats, so don't think too much about that. Whenever you level up, you move the hard point level upwards, which means, let's say I go to level 10. Then I can take those soft points and I can remove 10 soft points to get back down to 0. Or I can add the 23 soft points and get all the way to 33. This essentially, and a little bit strangely, speeds up the beginning. It stretches out the middle because you have more options. And it lowers the top if you are at max level, where you can squeeze yourself back down. Intended basically for people, of course, to be able to fiddle it and mess around with what range they want to invade in, first of all. Secondly, it gives you a sort of way to respec, but not really, because I kind of want you to be able to respec, but also you won't actually have to in the game with the way this works. Because you pick a core, let's say it's your center in this piece, you've leveled it all the way up and you think, oh no, it's too high level. Well, then you go out, you farm a guy that drops the same core, and then you start leveling that up while playing on the other one, just because if you want to do one thing over the other. And then you can level that specifically to the point without losing your entire character or having to remake it. Not sure if this is a good idea for a RPG style game, but I do really like the freedom that it gives the player, and I hope it won't be too confusing, but that may be, can't tell for sure until we actually have it and it's tested and people can complain about it or not. So do keep in mind all of this is subject to change, but that's sort of my basic idea for the cores. Spells. Up here on the 1 and 2, obviously, each of these sides, so not the rings, but left hand, these two here are toggled on the left D-pad. These two are toggled on the right D-pad. These two are toggled on the bottom D-pad. And these two are toggled on the upwards going D-pad. That's the basic gist. So, for spells, each spell, you have essentially 2 spell slots always on every character. And each spell has a base component, which is what will be activated if you click triangle when you have any of these 2 spells equipped. It will use the base version of the spell. This base version of the spell is expanded a little later on when we get to some of the items that you can put into the left hand and the right hand in regards to spell tools. This, of course, spell shenanigans up here runs on magic. Your blue meter up here, which slowly regens. This is in order to avoid having it run on charges, so that you will never really run out of abilities to cast the spells, but you will be limited heavily by the regen. You can't just spam until your meter is full. It's sort of the same theory as with stamina. It's just not going to work as quickly. So it forces you to play with both in a sense. The level of this can be varied, of course. We could add potentially things that give you more regen, that switches it or something weird like that. I'm not totally sure. This will have to be fiddled out and tested, and, you know, it has to be put into the water to see if it sinks or no. That's the basic gist for spells. I don't have any ideas for spells at the current moment, because this is, you know, we'll have to make the base class for each of the item classes first, and then after that we can begin playing around with the fun part. Any case, moving on. If we go down to the bottom, we have the classic not consumables, because I'm not a fan of consumables, so items, and I should probably call it tools or something else than items, because all of these things are essentially items that you can equip, but don't think too much about it. Let's just call them items for now. Think about the primary thing that I'm thinking that is in this category is obviously flasks. And the thing is, I say flasks as a multiple thing, because the thing I'm taking inspiration from, obviously a specific genre, uses a flask-based charge system for healing. So like, you get a flask, it has a certain amount of charges, and whenever you chuck a charge, it refreshes your HP. Classic health potion deal, if we're being honest about it. Now I thought, why not make you have different flasks? You don't need just one. You could have multiple flasks, each doing their own thing. So different flask, different effect. This could be that some flasks have more healing, or some has less. Some heal instantly, some heal over time. All of these things could essentially be variables that we could add in. Of course, with some sort of reasonable approach to it. Now, if we look at, let's say, let me click over here. Let's look at example item 2. If I go into, hold on, let me pick item 1, because otherwise you can't see the bottom. So the only issue that is with this is whether or not that you have an overall flask amount available, or if you can use all of the flasks. Because it could potentially scale a little bit out of control if you put a flask that has the maximum amount of healing into each and every one of these slots, and then you essentially, you know, you get quite a lot of them, first of all, if you totally heal that way. And then on top, you also have to swap in order to heal, which might not feel the best. So I'm not totally sure how to handle that the best way, but that's the thought around it. Multiple different flasks so that the choice you make for which flask you use matters, which I like the idea of. This is also intended for items in general is intended for buffing. So we can keep buffing out of spells and make sure that the spells are interesting and not just buffs. Because that often happens when it comes to it. It doesn't mean they can't be. We could make something that's a specific thing. But I'd prefer to keep that down here for a specific reason. You could either make temporary or permanent buffs based on which flask you chugged. This could essentially be part of the flask's effect, or it could be something that you add to it by fucking adding a little ingredient into it. Who knows? Speaking of that adding ingredient, we will get back to what I'm going to refer to as merging later on. Obviously, we also kind of want multiplayer tools in here. We could change that out, as it might be annoying to have the two main items that you're going to use while you play, and then go in and click the two, go out, use the thing, go back in, click the two, and then switch back to the one that you want to use. But at the same time, it is relatively quick to do, so I'm not sure what's going to feel the worst there. Hopefully we can fiddle around with it, or maybe we give a specific space for the multiplayer tools. We'll see. It depends on what tools is made, it depends on different multiplayer options, potentially. We can't really say at the current stage until we have it, but I would like to shove them in here. And I would like to not shove them in there at the same time. It's a little confusing, I'm sorry, but it's to be figured out, essentially. It's to be determined later. I even wrote it in the notes. Anyways, moving on to left hands and right hands. Oops, if I can manage this. There we go. Essentially what we have here is we have three different types of weapons per se, so to speak. We have the shield, we have weapons, and we have spell tools. So let's go through each of those to begin with. Weapons are a range of projectiles, so different types of projectiles in different sizes, shapes, and amounts. I am considering adding potentially a melee option, but don't get your hopes up, because I kind of don't want to add it since we're in a 2D environment and I don't feel like 2D functions well together with melee, but I may have to test it to see if it's worth fiddling around with. Worst case scenario, I could add, you could add a little dagger, and you can just throw the dagger, or you can add a humongous battle axe and simply throw the battle axe. So worst case scenario, even if I make assets for something that's melee, we can probably reuse them anyway. Shields. Intended function is, of course, on the grab. Whenever we hunker down, stand still. You could make smaller movements with this, maybe. I'm not quite sure, because it's kind of nice being able to stop in a specific spot and then throw at a specific angle. It's also what makes it a little bit difficult, but something to master. Essentially, I can't really view it here. Like, how do I... Okay, I'm gonna pretend view where the block is with the camera, okay? Sorry for the confusing. So, let's say that I block. And right now he's looking straight ahead, so the block would be over here. If he switches around, the block will be on the other side. If I start looking with the, with the thing that I control the angle that I dash with, which is convenient because it's also the shot angle and stuff like that, the shield will, of course... Let me see if I can follow it around here. Like, I'm trying to follow it around. I don't really have to do it, but basically that's how you would do it. The angle of which, so like, imagine, actually I can go in and do this. Let's do unit modification. Imagine that around this circle on the outside here, a certain portion of it, let's say from here to here, imagine a nice V on that shape. Shield will be the front of that. So it has a block degree angle, where if you're hit on that shield or on that side, it will reduce the damage. We also have stability, so how much stamina you are consuming by blocking, similar to how everything else is going to cost stamina eventually, as well as potentially a reduced effect for specific damage types. I'm not quite sure if I want to add damage types to the game. We probably should. We might have the classics, magic, melee, magic, physical, fire, or something like that, where each shield could have its own value within those. Of course, with the assumption that none of them ever reach 100%, and that's a point I'm not gonna back down on ever. Just saying. You will always take some damage. It may be very small, but it will never be zero. Shield types are to be determined, but the initial idea is small, medium, large, with their equivalent aspects. Not quite sure what that would be. We can obviously do a sort of parry, but in this game, if we're doing only projectiles, return the projectile, sort of? Who knows? We'll see. Maybe there are shields that are advantageous for one thing versus another thing. It's too early to say, essentially. Moving on to spell tools. Spell tools, as I write it in here, could be any unique thing which is considered magical somehow. It could be a stick. That's called a magical stick. It could be a little pebble. It could be a piece of cloth, essentially. It is, by its definition, irrelevant what the spell tool is. The key factor that they separate themselves from weapons and shields is that it is dependent on the spell that you have equipped in your current slot. So let's say that we are on spell 1. When I then have a spell tool in either of these 4 hands here, whatever the spell tool is, and whatever its interaction with that spell 1 is what's going to determine the R1 and the R2 for, let's say, the left hand. Each of the normal weapons will obviously have an R1 and R2 as well. In this case, however, because it is so loose, so to speak, we can't just make it have everything. So I'm not sure what the best way to do this is, but my initial thought is what I'm going to call the slot rule that we're going to return to a little bit later, which is actually right now. I can see that. So let's just do that right at the beginning. The slot rule is basically a tool that changes based off of which slot it is in. So if it's in this particular spot, it will become something special. In this case, a shield. In these two cases, weapons, and in this case, a utility offhand. Potentially. I'm not sure if I'm gonna marry that proposal, so to speak, because, you know, people might want to have multiple versions of different things. So that can definitely vary a lot and scale a little bit out of proportion, potentially, and we'll probably need to dial it back somehow. Don't get your hopes up too much. I'll try and make a couple of options for it, and we'll see where it sort of leads after having tested it. In addition to that, I also did a test hit damage script. You have already seen that one. That's basically me looking a little bit into the reconnections. We take a little bit of damage. I jump into them. Oh, you saw the little bug that we're going to discuss a little later. It's a very good indicator. If you noticed it in like the split second it happened. As you can see, I've taken like a fair bit of damage now. Every time I collide with one of these, I take one little chunk of damage. Arbitrary how much, we can figure that out later. So that is the collection of all of the additions and where we are at design-wise as well. Moving on to some of the adjustments. Obviously, the scripts have been documented and sorted. I mentioned that earlier. I've removed an old cam that I didn't need anymore, that was not being used. I've adjusted the player throw angle a little bit. You probably won't be able to notice, but there's a tiny difference in that. It's not super important. I have moved the UI of this. If you remember, it was sort of stacked under here before. I moved it over here so that it's like out of the way, as well as adjusted where the height difference between these things are. So, oh my god, guys, please. We're getting to the bug later. Come on, you little buggers. I have, let me see here, where were we? Adjusted the throw angle, move the thing. I've updated the unit collision chart with a new collision test, essentially. Readjusted the textures of these. I had an initial set that did not have that tiny little dot in here in the center on the 5% spot, basically. I added that in. I'm not satisfied with how it looks, but it functions temporarily as a viewpoint for it. Halfway between this, you know, roughly 10% estimation. Let's see here, what else? Oh yeah, the menu was moved slightly down to compensate so that it doesn't overlap anymore. I've also resized the text a little bit. All of these things are like something you probably don't even notice, but I'm just, you know, listing it off here. And then, of course, I investigated the camera bug again. The one that I have mentioned a couple of times, because I keep like leaving it and then forgetting about it and then relearning what the problem was. And let me see if I can show it. Let's speed up to the top first. This is a decent spot, I think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here into the debug features unit modification. Also significantly reduces our speed just for testing purposes. So if I go here, actually that's super duper annoying. I need him to slide off somewhere. Oh, okay, fine. Okay, give me a second. I need to find a suitable platform for this. Here, I think. Oh, maybe here. Okay, so now I need to do it fast enough. Come on. Okay. What's the sequence for it again? I let go. I click options. I click debug features. Oh fuck! I fucked it up. There we go. So let's see here. Now he's gonna accelerate a little bit. Obviously, if he hits any piece of ground, he's gonna stop. He might hit that one. Nope. Okay, we passed by it nicely. Now, what the camera bug is oh no, you little bastard. Okay, fine. you oh yeah. Okay, whatever. Anyway, you will see the whole thing jiggling a little bit here, right? As we move around. What is happening is essentially the camera bug, quote in quotation marks, is when the character suddenly janks backwards in a very weird manner, which we probably won't be able to see now because he botched my angle. And it's very much more noticeable at higher speeds. That's kind of why I went to the top to get a proper speed difference. The thing that happens is a fundamental problem for the GPU, which is when I try to draw this sprite at a particular location between 2 pixels. We are actually very low on resolution here for, you know, the obvious reasons that it's efficient. So that was... I could not display it. Let me see if I can do it faster, I guess. It's very hard to notice, but it's something that is more easily noticed when you... Oh, come on. Go to the top. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to notice it, but if I do this... Do you see those jumps? Like right at the beginning? There was one, there was one, another one. We had like 5 as we went down through. Whenever it's trying to display the let's say just the core of this character here at a specific spot, and that specific spot is calculated to be between a couple of pixels, it's not going to be able to display the thing there, thus going back to the previous position for a split second in a frame. And I'm not sure how to fix it, because again, it's a fundamental problem for the GPU. The common resolutions for it is to upscale the entire game into larger resolutions, but I'm a little stubborn and I kind of don't want to do that because it's inefficient. So I may have to like seriously look into how to cheese that. There are a couple of ways to do it, involving jingling around the camera at an appropriate counter speed, essentially like similarly to how we're doing the parallax effect, I would assume. If you look at the background. So that might be... I might have to look into that to get like a crispy, smooth movement that doesn't have weird visual janky glitching. And the worst part is it's not even an error. It's just because the hardware can't display it properly. It's like, come on. You know, why is this the problem? Anyway, so that's the thing. Speaking of bugs, you may have noticed I talked a little bit about it earlier. Let's see if we can find a couple of boyos. Should be one down here, right? I'll spam a few more. So I noticed something. When these guys, they jank into each other, sometimes there comes like a weird wish... Oh, there it was! Did you see it? Did you see what I have named the big head bug collision? For some reason... And I have no idea why this is happening just yet, because I haven't investigated. I just noticed it right before I was about to make this video. The head, specifically the head on these guys, for some reason can glitch to an abnormally large size when they collide. I have no idea why. It is very, very random that it's only the head doing it. As far as I can tell, at least. So if you freeze frame it on it, you can... I'm pretty sure. I haven't done that, but maybe try it in the video, I guess. So let's just, not think about that. I'm gonna have to redo the collision calculations a little bit. I want to add a thing where essentially we burn a little bit more than we do just now. Right now, it will find every single collision with every single thing. Determine which one is the closest, and then of course pick that one, but it will do it at every single frame, which is very good for detecting everything. Problem is, if I have to sort of physically make sure that these two here, when they collide, move away from each other to not recollide instantaneously. Which, while it works, isn't the most smart way to do it, because if you then somehow manage to get this one and this one to not move out of each other, you will get multi-hitting. And I ideally only want one collision per hit detection, so to speak. Right now we essentially have more hit detections, I guess you could argue it that way. So yeah. I want to do that, but I'm not sure what the best way to do it. We could basically put in a little millisecond delay so that it won't be able to like re-hit the same dude again. I essentially try to turn off the bouncing between these two, and notice that when one of these guys falls right down through me instead of bouncing on me, he collides like a gazillion times as he goes through, which is kind of what I want to avoid. So that's the next thing. Anyways, I found another one, which is when I throw these guys, I'm not sure if you can see, they have some small boxes around some of their limbs. This is a display error that shows their invisible limbs with the default limb view, and I need to correct that somehow. I found another one which is a little bit too old and I can't remember what it is, but essentially I described it as collision when Warworm hits the player while both are in dashing can result in no color change. Investigate this. Since I've removed the color changing from the bouncing, I can't exactly investigate that now, can I? Thank you, previous me. And then there is a player cam area in the well spawn. Seems to interfere with the anchor generation. I will look into that later if it becomes a problem. I have a few pending bugs that are in the background that will need to be like checked as I go onto them. Priority, I suppose, is where it's at. Right now, I would say the visual glitching is a higher priority because I kind of want to fix that so that it becomes smooth. It looks better if it's smooth, and if I don't have to worry about the scale of the textures, it's even better because right now we are sort of at very low resolution, which of course gives it the retro look a little bit, but it's also just quite efficient for the size of the game room that I have. If I upscale, we may run into some issues in that regard, which might be a little bit of potato code. I know, but fuck it. I like being able to overview the whole thing instead of having to redo the entire game and make sure that you have only like a tiny actual room and then moving the entire environment. It's sort of like the alternative is that instead of moving the player around in the world, I have to move the entire world around the player, which is doable and can be done in the exact same way that we are jumping around here. It's not like it's a problem per se, but it's just a lot of work. It's a lot of work that I'd like to avoid having to do so I can focus on the, let's say, the whole design part that we described earlier. And I believe that is sort of it, actually. Not sure how long we've been going for, because I can't check it. Probably a little bit longer, maybe. Yeah. That's the basic gist. So that's where we're at the current moment. I'm also dead. I didn't notice. I forgot. I forgot about that. My HP is 0. Anyway, the next thing to work on, is essentially to take the design descriptions of the inventory, as I mentioned it earlier. All of these things, I need at least one example of each of the items that I have, so that we can have something that interacts with the game. I need to build up the core system and figure out the stats as well as we go, because it's kind of like all of it needs to be made in one go still. Which is why it's also kind of nice to have this design overview, just so that you have an idea of where we're going at with it. Should also allow me to like build the additional inventory systems that are supposed to be connected to it, so that, let's say that I have 5 cores in here. I get another core from a drop from a mob. What do I do with it? I can then get the option to either replace one of these 5 or put it into the primary overall storage. That's kind of the idea, which of course means that you need an overall primary storage somewhere, as well as the thing that interacts with it and allows you to switch out each of these and replace them and stuff like that. And as well as allowing that too, I essentially need 2 cores, let's say, so that I can put a core into the center and then take that core and then move it over here or down here or up to the right or upwards. Because until then, I can't exactly do it. So yeah, I guess that's the basic. So anyways, that is the total overview for the current version of the game. I don't feel like it's all that much. Visually, it's not that impressive, but there is a lot of things happening. And once we're getting some of these things in place, it will be significantly straightforward to actually design the rest, which should be quite nice. So yeah, we're getting there slowly. As usual. Plus, I'm also making decent progress on the house, so that's also why I've been a little bit out of tune. Now we're getting into just the life things in general, so you can tap off if you're not interested in that. Basically, I've been renovating my house, and it's an ongoing process because I'm doing it slowly as well, and it's tedious work to say the least, but it kind of needs to be done, as well as having the fiber guys come over and try and do it. Hold on. Oh wow. Okay, this is a very long video. You know what? I'm just gonna end. I am just gonna. I'm gonna stop here. Thank you if you watched all the way through. Hopefully, it was sort of informative of where the project is at. I will see you again, ideally next month, because we're kind of trying to. I'm kind of trying to jump back on the schedule of getting one update out a month, at least. Just for your sake, essentially. So yeah, take care.